So welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Marlon Ruiz. I'm happy to host today's Google Web3 Fireside Chat with Staci Warden. I appreciate everyone taking the time to join. Today, we'll be covering a bunch of different topics and really excited to dive deep on the Algorand Foundation and talk about some of their latest activities and how they're contributing to the Web3 space. So Staci's background, she comes from a lot of different areas, including public sector, private sector, and also nonprofit, working in executive positions in Milken, JP Morgan, NASDAQ, and also in the US Treasury Department. It's really cool because she brings a lot of her different skill sets to the crypto community. And as you can see by the most recent news, we kind of need more help in this industry, focusing on the right things to do and developing the right community and technologies to bring the crypto space forward. Currently, she's the CEO of Algorand Foundation, and she's been there since January. She definitely still makes time for other activities, working with the United Nations, the European Parliament, and also with the U.S. Financial Technical Association. So that's why we're here today. Very excited to get started. So with less ado, let's go ahead and get going.
And I appreciate the opportunity to be here. This is my second Google event in 2022, so I'm becoming a regular.
That's wonderful. Yeah, we appreciate you. We appreciate you coming and sharing your thoughts. And hopefully it gets better every time you come visit us. So thanks again for coming today and joining us. Just a little bit curious, where are you at today? Everyone seems to be somewhere in the world. Where are you at?
I am in Waterville Valley, New Hampshire, where it's snowing actually. So up in the mountains of New England.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. And sorry for the snow, but at least when it first falls, it's going to be beautiful. So enjoy that until you need to have like a big shovel. So that's great, great, great. When we have these talks, we always kind of want to understand the story, especially in your particular case. You've come in from a very deep financial background, right? Working with the Treasury, working with Milken and NASDAQ and all these different places. So what we'd really love to know to start is, can you give us a little bit of an intro? How did you find crypto? What was intriguing about it? And just kind of your path that brought you here today.
Yeah, well, I appreciate, Marlon, how you highlighted how old I am to kick the whole thing off. It's very kind of you, really. There's a couple of different threads that spanned my career. And, I have been in the private sector, and I was at JP Morgan for 8 years. I was at the NASDAQ for a couple of years, US Treasury Department, spent the last several years working for Mike Milken. So I've been in and around finance and economics, I guess, all my life. And I've always been mostly concerned with access to capital, financial inclusion, sort of deep kinds of the processes and the plumbing of how to make finance work for more people than it often does. And the kind of the flywheel for me has always been that if people, and this is a little bit of a developing country and emerging markets perspective for sure, because that's where I've spent most of my professional career, but is that if you can find better outlets for people's savings rather than just bank accounts, which typically pay you negative real interest rates, by which I mean interest rates that are less than the inflation rate in the country, then that will happen through capital markets. If you can find better outlets for those savings will go to the private sector, and the private sector will then be able to grow and will be able to hire more people. They will be able to pay those people more. Those households will then have more savings, and those savings can then be deployed back into the private sector. So it's very much a private sector-led growth model that I kind of believe in as the equals kind of prosperity and growth. And so when I was at the Milken Institute, I ran a couple of centers there, and one of the programs that I ran was about. I failed miserably at doing this. I'm going to confess right away, but I ran this program trying to improve the financial markets knowledge of the press in Washington, D.C. Just trying to kind of like improve the level of understanding and the level of reporting. And so I would do these lunches with the National Institute for the Press. Half of them came just for the free lunch, I will say, but it was kind of interesting. And she said to me, this was in 2013, they're asking me what this Bitcoin thing is. So could you, can you explain it? And sometimes I would have guest lectures, but I didn't know who a guest lecture on Bitcoin could possibly be. And I was sort of interested in it. So I think I have a kind of unique experience, which is that the first time I learned about it was to teach it, not to actually, I wasn't just like trying to hold a bag or, something like that. And I remember my house was being remodeled. And so I was living in this like shitty little 1-bedroom apartment. And I just, fell down that rabbit hole. I was listening to like podcasts in Germany. I mean, not in German, but, Gavin Andresen on this podcast in German, and just like trying to figure out like, what was this proof of work thing and how did it actually work? And like, what was this? And I couldn't believe, the promise. I really, I was probably a little bit wrong about that. It wasn't quite fit for purpose, a little bit early, but anyway, it was really kind of falling in love with this idea of writing to one ledger and having a consensus mechanism whereby a bunch of different computers that, didn't know or didn't trust each other could come to an agreement about things.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love that story, and just thinking about consensus. That's something I think about a lot of time. Like, how does everyone come together, right? And in the sense, that's what we're doing on the blockchain, and it can apply to so many different things. So that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that background. I guess when you think about, as you took your journey, learning about proof of work, and then thinking, hey, maybe there's something better, learning about proof of stake. I guess, how can you talk about and maybe give us a little background on the discovery of Algo, and like, how did you find it, and like, what was the thing that stood out to you specifically in that particular blockchain that said, hey, this is something I got to focus
on? So I had been in the space since 2013, and I'm not any kind of an OG or anything, but I was around it, and it was very much a little bit of a side hustle for me, and I was watching the space develop, through sort of the initial coin offerings and then DeFi summer. And I decided that it was getting kind of too big and too active. So I couldn't follow it part-time. And I'd been at the Milken Institute then for almost 8 years. And so I decided to go into, decide to make a decision about whether I was going to do crypto full-time or not. So I left in June of last year, the Milken Institute, and I decided to just take some time off. And I had a bunch of clients from work I had done. And so I was living a very nice life, by the way. I was, and if you ever quit your job, by the way, do it in the summer, because there's something visceral in your back of your mind from your student days that makes you think that you should have the summers off, like that will never go away for you.
Like being a kid again. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, don't ever quit January 1st, because you like the whole world is like kicking off the new year productively and you're not doing anything, but it's fine to quit in June. So I was having a nice summer, improving my tennis game, all of that. And they headhunted me, and I had a couple of clients, but they headhunted me to be on the board of Algorand, and I had not really heard of it. And I sit on the board of the Global Blockchain Business Council, and they were like, yeah, that's a really good chain, Silvio Macaulay, et cetera, but they didn't know enough about it either. And so when if you're going to sit on a board, you really are lending your name and your reputation to it. So you have to be quite careful, as you all know. And so I started doing some DD on it, and I had for the first time that same feeling when I first learned about Bitcoin. I had kind of for the first time that feeling like, oh, I get it. This is very elegant, and this is different. This is kind of a cut above, starting, of course, with Silvio. But that's how so they headhunted me. I sat on the board for 4 months, and then they made me the CEO in January of this year.
Okay, right. So you were actually, engaged before CEO being on the board. That's a great bit of detail. All right, so you got to buy before you try, or try before you buy. So that's awesome. You got to look under the covers. You were confident at that point you're doing the right thing. So that's a great point that you make. That's fantastic. Do you have any perspective, since we kind of danced around a little bit between proof of work and proof of stake? I mean, obviously the market seems to be going to proof of stake. Do you think that there's still a place for proof of work for something like Bitcoin, or do you think proof of stake kind of takes it all over, and maybe proof of work lives inside of proof of stake, if you want to say it like that, in the future?
Well, I think, Satoshi Nakamoto is the idea of the blockchain at its core for me is this idea that everything is being written to one ledger. Right now in finance, money moves from bank balance sheet to bank balance sheet. And the history of financial innovation for the last 10 years has been making that messaging faster and better and more secure. And, in 2015, we were so proud of ourselves as an industry that we went from trade settlement T+3 down to T+2, and it took like 5 years probably to get there, right? And you can, send, a movie from Nigeria to Malaysia by WhatsApp in a minute, but you can't send $10, that
True.
$10 is going to travel through the correspondent banking system to get there. So the real innovation is this idea that you are going to write to one ledger, all transactions to one ledger. But if you're going to maintain that ledger, of course, you don't want it maintained in one entity. So the whole juice of this whole enterprise is, how can you get these computers to agree, maintain this ledger, even if some of them are nefarious? How can it make sure that the nefarious ones can't take over, and the ledger has integrity? And a blockchain it's not about truth. Of course, it's about integrity. And so, Satoshi Nakamoto had a really brilliant idea with a proof of work mechanism, consensus mechanism. Of course, an arms race is built into it, because you've got to solve this problem. Whoever solves it the fastest. It's got to be hard to solve and easy for everybody else to verify. That was the kind of clever element of it. And so it lends itself, of course, to an arms race to solve it more quickly. And then people came along and said, that's, uses a lot of energy. It's not very efficient. And it kind of doesn't reward the people that are most bought into the system. So, why not reward the people that have the biggest stake? And there are a couple of different versions of it, but, that seems fair. And it's much more energy efficient. And the problem with that, as we all know, is that there's two, I would say, kind of core problems with it. One is that the rich get richer. So the people with the biggest stake, have the ability to append the next block, and they get paid for it. They get richer. And then second, it's not very secure inherently, because it's like the vector of attack is known to everybody. Like, who to attack? That guy over there with the stake. It's like very obvious. And so Silvio came along, and then Vitalik Buterin also sort of famously. There's a trilemma in international monetary economics, which says that a country can't have open capital flows, control over its monetary policy, and a pegged exchange rate at the same time. One of those has to give in order for the other two to work. And so Vitalik Buterin sort of said the analog to that in crypto and blockchain is that a blockchain cannot be scalable, secure, and decentralized at the same time. Now, Silvio Macaulay is living his life over at MIT. He won the Turing Award. He's, a tenured professor. And he had invented a couple of things that the whole crypto ecosystem used, in particular, zero knowledge proofs and verifiable random functions, invented or co-invented. And he never had the idea to attach money to this. This was another part of Satoshi Nakamoto's kind of genius. But anyway, he was living his life happily as a cryptographer, and he's watching this space develop and develop. And I think he decided, I could probably build a better one of those. And in particular, I think this trilemma is probably, you could probably cut through the horns of this trilemma, actually. And so, as I said, everything, as you all know as well, is all about the consensus mechanism, really. So he developed, in 2017, he was able to raise a bunch of money because of his name. They never did an ICO or anything like that. It went live in 2019. He developed a pure proof of stake consensus mechanism. And that is the thing that is different about the Algorand protocol. And I think maybe I'll pause there, and then I can go into, if you'd like, what that consensus mechanism looks like. But anyway, that is it is the consensus mechanism that makes Algorand different, and it makes it quite fast and quite lightweight, and with a very low carbon footprint, easy to scale and decentralized. So it's the consensus mechanism that gives you all three of the horns of the trilemma.
Yeah, that's great, because I've always been thinking, we have a lot of L1s out there. So what's the differentiator with each chain? So yeah, I would love to know a little bit more about that consensus that you're talking about, and how that makes your chain stand out in your mind.
Yeah, so it leverages verifiable random functions, and so it's called a pure proof of stake, and it leverages randomness. So it is not about how much stake you have, but the more stake you have, the greater the probability that you will get picked. Is kind of how it works in one sentence. But for every algo you have, So it works on something called Byzantine agreement, which is different than how Bitcoin and Ethereum and some of the other chains work, where there's kind of a race of chain forks, and then the one that doesn't win kind of falls off. In the Algorand blockchain, every block is secure, no fork, a complete final settlement every 3.9 seconds. Every 3.9 seconds, another block is appended to the blockchain. And what happens in these 3.9 seconds is that for every algo that you hold, you are running like a little, like a slot machine. Say every algo runs a little slot machine, and you don't know if you're going to win or not. But if like 3 pineapples come, I'm using this because I know you're not very technical over there at Google, so I have to give my lightweight explanation of this. But like
thank you, appreciate that.
Yeah, 3 pineapples come up, and then you submit your transactions that you've scooped up, and you submit, and then that's kind of round one. Everybody submits. And then in round two, the transactions and you have to wait a little bit of time. So it physically, it can't actually be much faster. So because you have to wait for them all to kind of come together, and then you pick the ones with the lowest hash function attached to them, and then the winner. And then in round 3, you make sure that there's no double spending or everything's okay with that block of transactions, and then that block is appended. So you can kind of understand that like people with more algos will probably win this little lottery more times, but it's not guaranteed. And in particular, you don't know until it happens whether you have appended the next block. And so therefore, the vector of attack is unknown to it's unknowable to anybody. And so that is what gives it the security. The fact that something like 1,000 are picked out of all of the different computers participating is what gives it its decentralization. And the idea that you can run this thing on a laptop, it used to be on a Raspberry Pi, but now we're more performant, so you have to run on a pretty nice laptop, is what gives it the ability to scale. So Solana, for example, I'm not throwing shade, but it's quite fast, but it costs a lot of money to run, to participate in Solana consensus, like a lot, like, $100,000, kind of a lot to participate. And with Algorand, it costs you nothing to participate, and therefore you are not paid for consensus. It's a different approach. And so Silvio says that, you should be a good citizen. And if you're a good citizen, you should participate in consensus. And we don't want to pay you, because then we aren't going to get, the true good citizens and the believers will get kind of mercenary capital running our network. And it's much more important to have people that are embedded in the network and have a stake in the network to actually run the network. So it's a philosophical differentiator for us as well.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because thinking that it could be very expensive to run a node, very complicated, challenging, that's going to be harder to get adoption, right? So if you have a simple way for people to be part of the ecosystem in that way, that sounds like a really great on-ramp for people to kind of understand what's going on. Years ago, I did some, playing with the ETH and running a node. It was kind of a funny story. It wasn't for real. It was just to try it out and see how it is. But like, I can definitely imagine how having a lighter client and being able to participate would be a wonderful thing.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool. Does that connect at all to like sustainability and because that's the one thing we think about, or everyone thinks about, is like, how do we do all this stuff without breaking the world? So if you have any thoughts around that, I'd be interested to know, like, how does this work in that respect? And maybe because you're not using the beefer machines, you're taking less power. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah. That's 100% it. And to be fair, most proof of stake blockchains do not use a lot of energy. We use the energy of like 7 houses, and we may get up to, depending on how to what extent we take over the world, we'll probably get up to a small neighborhood, but we'll never use more energy than that. And because we're a blockchain and we have to be cool, we offset by smart contract the carbon footprint that we do have. So we buy a carbon credit, is a protocol that has built on Algorand, and we buy carbon offsets with the fees that we generate by smart contract to make sure that we are always carbon negative, in case kind of evil CEO comes in after me and wants to change that policy. Now, our footprint, this is not really a bold claim to make, because our footprint is not very heavy, but at the same time, our transaction fees are sub penny. So we don't make a lot of money in transaction fees either. In fact, I think since the blockchain has been in existence, we've made something like $800,000 in total transaction fees. I mean, it's absolutely nothing.
Wow.
You know,
Okay.
yeah, my head of NFTs at Algorand Foundation says he's spent, $9,000 in ETH gas fees alone just buying NFTs. It's just like not part of the world of Algorand.
Yeah, it's Looney Tunes is what's going on out there. Actually, that's a great segue. We've got the FIFA World Cup coming up November 20th. That's exciting. I think you guys have been doing some interesting things. I think that you are definitely doing some work on NFTs for them. Can we talk about that a little bit? There's definitely a lot of folks in our community who are excited about NFTs. So I'd love to uncover that a little bit with you and kind of understand what's going on around there.
Yeah, I will say I've learned more about football in the last, 2 months than I ever knew about in my entire life. I'm completely the wrong person to be any kind of a spokesperson for this, but it is my understanding that a bunch of guys get together and, run back and forth, kicking a ball every 4 years, and we are now a part of that. So we don't do, to be more serious, we don't do any sponsorships that do not involve our technology. So we are not the type that like puts our name on a sports arena or anything like that. So we built the NFT marketplace for FIFA. And the way that we did that, in fact, is that FIFA decided that their, NBA Top Shots, like there's a thing, this is probably a thing people love, these teams, and we've got all these great moments in sports, and, we should do this. We kind of don't know what we're doing, but we've got a very big name, very big profile. World Cup's coming up in November. And so they hired a consultant to pick a blockchain for them. And so that consultant looked around and said, you should be on the Algorand blockchain. So we didn't, they're both, Silvio's Italian and so is the head of FIFA. So it was a little bit easy once it got started, of course, but we didn't, it wasn't really a marketing thing so much as it was, they built the NFT marketplace on Algorand.
That's great.
Yeah, and we may do more together. There may be something around, secondary market player trading or secondary market ticket sales. We'll have to kind of see where that goes. But now we have this NFT marketplace, and it's cool. You buy these packets, and people are very excited about the moments in sports that they get and whatnot.
Yeah, there's so much passion around football, and that's kind of where things seem to make sense in the NFT space, or just in general in life. When there's a lot of love and a lot of feeling towards these topics, then that's a great spot, right? And so for FIFA World Cup, many fans, doesn't matter which country you are in. Yeah, so that's really cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think the two ways to think about NFTs. I mean, there's, they're not JPEGs, only, and of course, but I think there's a couple of different ways to think about them. One is that, you could get credit for what you do. So if you make a lot of purchases of a certain kind of music, we've just invested in Napster, for example, and so we're trying to bring a web3 sensibility to a very deeply web2 protocol platform. But this idea that, if you spend more money on a certain performer and, you declare yourself a fan, then they will understand that and know that and give you better seats. Or maybe when you walk into the arena, oh, you're an Arsenal fan and it's very obvious. And so here, come meet, a player or something like that. That idea that you can monetize in a way community. And the second piece of that is that you as a fan can participate in the success of somebody that you care very much about, right? That, yep. It's kind of a second piece that the value of works of creativity, art or music or sports or whatever, that value can accrue more and more transparently to the creator of that value themselves, right? Then of course there's, financial market tokenization, and that comes in the form of, making smaller slices of big chunky investments that can be tokenized. And so if there's a rental property, something building on Algorand called Lofty AI is super interesting. They buy rental properties and they tokenize them. And so you, as a smaller investor, can own a rental income stream without having to own the entire property, right? And it brings liquidity to those markets, and it brings mom and pop investors to very, stable and typically considered safe. Nothing I say is investment advice of any kind, of course.
Not financial advice.
Yes, but income streams that are just, not available to you as a non-accredited investor typically.
Yeah, for me personally, understanding how paper works for, land and things like that, I feel like it's going to be a bright shining star. I think it's still early, but I love that, that idea that you mentioned and what folks are doing there. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And what I think is kind of interesting about that, and this is the last thing I guess I'll say on that, is that if you take that to the reductio ad absurdum, so say you have a bond and you tokenize that bond, and then you can imagine tokenizing it into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces until pieces get so small that this bond is operating as cash, that you can kind of give little slices of your tokens of your NFT of the bond and pay for a cup of coffee with it. And then, it kind of, the mind boggles, right? You have to really think hard about what the difference between that and cash might be, right?
Yeah, that's very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I'd love to, as we're thinking about future things, as I'm thinking about what's next, I'd love to talk a little about what's coming up. For me, there's one kind of theory I think about, everyone thinks about, you have this idea of quantum computing. Will quantum computing break the world? How do you know what the state of the world is? Like, how do you do these crazy things when the future is so unwritten, and you have to be prepared the most. So like, I think that you guys recently released a paper, Falcon, that's made some buzz, and you're also doing some work around safe proofs. Can we talk a little bit about that? Because it seems like a really interesting subject that you guys are focusing on there.
Sure. The Falcon keys are used in state proofs, but they are not the same thing. So I think state proofs are pretty interesting to talk about, but I'll say what I know about Falcon keys, and I will tell you now that when I finish talking, I will have basically exhausted, everything that I understand about how these work. But you all know the risk to cryptography that comes from quantum computing, the brute force that can, kind of brute force solve some of the quote unquote insolvable things that cryptography relies on. And so if you want to have a quantum secure key, the key and the signature have to be small enough to be used easily and not, kind of clog up the operations. And it has to be sort of very fast and very easy to verify. And it has to be also flexible because you want your algorithm to have sort of staying power, over time. So the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they issued a contest for post-quantum resilient signature keys, solution to post-quantum resilience. And they, I think, spent 6 years, I want to say. They had something like 50 submissions, and they spent 6 years going through these things. Because, they have to battle test them. And we, a couple of guys, very smart guys associated with Algorand, a guy named Chris Pikert is one, and a couple of other guys, a guy named Craig, I think, Craig Gentry, and a man named Vaiken Kanchan. I'm sorry, his last name is long, but anyway, they go by GPV. They won this contest, and with something called Falcon Keys. And Falcon keys are sort of a fast Fourier lattice-based approach. And the idea, and again, when I say this, I've kind of exhausted my knowledge about it. But the idea is that with every message, there are a number of different valid signatures that can be picked. And the algorithm that picks the valid signature can be in a brute force computational environment, can reveal the signature key. So a Falcon key signature allows the algorithm to pick among signatures and pick a signature, and having a bunch of different messages and understanding a bunch of different messages does not allow you to, on the back of that, reveal the signature key. So that's the beauty of it from somebody who's not a cryptographer. But there are, of course, some interesting blog posts written more about it if you want to go deeper.
Yeah, and you can do all of that with lower latency and higher transaction per seconds, basically, on your chain. Is that kind of the magic that you all put together, or
no? I think that is really our forward-thinking post-quantum strategy. In addition, though, we've got a couple of other things that we're working on. So we were 6 months ago at about 1,200 transactions per second. The chain now does 6,000 transactions per second. And in Q1, it will move to 10,000 transactions per second. Going from 1,200 to 6,000, in my understanding, is much harder than going from 6,000 to 10,000. So you really have to solve all of the problems kind of early on to get that first jump. The other thing that we used to have was this, as I told you, in this, it's run by Byzantine agreement, so that when you're done with the block, for sure there's no going back, there's no possible forking. You have final settlement. That used to take place in about 4.9 seconds, and now it takes place in 2.9 seconds or 3.5 seconds or something, 2.9 seconds, I think. So just shaving off like a second took them a long time to figure out how to do. So in terms of their product roadmap, they're after 10, I think it's goes right to 40,000 transactions per second. That's the kind of, Visa is 7,000 transactions per second. So we are, although they say in peak capacity they can get up to like 30,000, but typically it does 7,000 transactions per second. So we're right up there with traditional finance speeds and performance.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So the other thing though is state. Do you want me to say a little bit about state proofs?
Yeah, please.
Okay. So one of the, the biggest issue in crypto this year until, Terra Luna and 3AC and FTX is no, Algorand doesn't need to shard because it has the performance without having to do so. So sharding only takes place because your blockchain isn't performant enough. We can get the same kind of scalability without needing to do that. The biggest problem that was this year, besides the big, call it the Bear Stearns and the Lehman Brothers problems, is the problems with bridges. So the bridges have just been hacked all year long, and it's been a big problem. And so state proofs allows trustless bridging. So it allows bridging between blockchains with just a smart contract. So you need something to kind of maybe give liquidity or do the updating, but basically what a state proof is, it is a picture in time of the Algorand blockchain. So it basically, every 15 minutes, it takes a kind of a picture, a snapshot of the Algorand blockchain, and a light client from another chain can pick up this snapshot of the Algorand blockchain and deploy it, so that you know when to lock algo. It knows that the algos are locked on our chain and can therefore release them on another chain without having to have a group of validators say, oh yeah, they're locked over there, they can be released over here. It just can automatically happen by smart contract. And this was quite revolutionary. And this uses Falcon keys. And so now, the one level of detail to this is that, of course, both chains need to use state proofs in order for us to understand that the transactions from the other chain really are locked. But we are deploying. We have a kind of a state proof alliance that we're trying, because it's the best technology, and so we don't really have pride of ownership about it. We want to make sure that it's deployed. It only works in proof of stake protocols because they're account based. But we think it's pretty exciting, and I think the industry is pretty, acting pretty excited about it as well.
Yeah, I think it's great. Basically, one thing I think about is, how do people come together, work together to make everything more secure? This sounds like something that really would, especially for bridges, because that is the nightmare that maybe a lot of folks have with all the bridge insecurities that are out there. So that's a great contribution. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome. Call me.
Yeah, that's what I read.
up at night after my day job, writing state proofs at my computer. Yeah.
100%. Perfect. So I think you have an event coming up, Decipher. Can we touch on that a little bit and kind of understand what's that about? Where is it at? Maybe there's some folks who might be interested in joining. If you could talk about that.
100%. So if you've got anybody at Google Middle East, we'd love to have you. It is in Dubai, the end of this month, the 28th through the 30th, and it is our annual event. So our whole engineering team will be there. Sylvia will be there. Some of the biggest players in the community will be there. I went to our last year's event, which was in Miami, and it was a little bit of, in my view, too much. Oh, I built on Algorand because Algorand is so great, because we love Algorand because, and of course there's a tech track, but the main stage track was a bit too love festy for me. So I have opened up the agenda. And so we'll have somebody from the European Parliament, the head of science and technology of the European Parliament will be there. We'll have, folks from, Binance and Kraken and all kinds of exchanges be there. SBF was one of my keynotes. He's among the other things that he's ruined, is one of them is my keynote slot. But we are now changing that slot into something called We Won't Get Fooled Again, and to talk about how you, I did say this though in a community meeting, and they're all like, they were all too young to know what I was talking about in terms of like the song, but sadly,
I guess I just dated myself. Whoops.
Yeah, exactly. You did. You really did. So we have an action-packed agenda, and we'd love to have, I don't know if there's a listserv or something for Google Middle East. We'd love to have you. It's in Dubai. I'd love to have you guys.
Well, as we're coming to the end here, Staci, I'd like to say thank you and just have one final question. If there's one takeaway where you want our community to think about, just something rolling around your head, what is it that, you want us to take away from meeting you today? Anything specific?
I think, my takeaway would have been different a couple of months ago, but, we're all very saddened by the fraud, frankly, that has taken place at FTX. I mean, this guy was he was a an important spokesperson for the industry. He was on Capitol Hill a lot. He was on podcasts a lot. He was very good on podcasts, by the way. Really, he had Steph Curry and Tom Brady and all of this. He really attracted a lot of retail participation. And the idea that this was just so terrible in and of itself, and that other shoes are dropping. I mean, we spent 4 days making sure we didn't have any direct exposure, but the guy wasted a lot of my time making sure that like my counterparties didn't have exposure, my counterparties didn't have exposure, and like that these things happen and they detract. They're very detracting from the work that people are trying to do in this space to solve real world problems and to solve things that I care very deeply about, and the reason that I'm in this space in the first place. And so I would just, recommend people to be discriminating and not lump, crypto together. Bitcoin uses a lot of energy. Crypto uses a lot of energy. It's not the same thing, right? FTX went belly up. Nouriel Rubino, everybody in crypto is corrupt. Like, I guess my one plea is to just dig in and try to make distinctions between, chains and between coins and between projects in this space, and in particular between decentralized finance and centralized finance.
Okay, great. I think those are perfect points to end with. I agree 1,000%. It's not all one thing. It's definitely not. So cheers. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and thank you to our wonderful guest, Staci Warden from Algorand Foundation. Looking forward to seeing what you guys do next. And, hey, you've been here twice. Maybe we'll see you a third time.
Yeah,
so, very much appreciating, what you do and spending the time with the community here. Just really appreciate you.